What's up, COD fans? Welcome back to Checkmate Gaming as we're dealing with our CDL Florida setup and prediction stream for you guys, getting ready for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday's games. Let's take a look, just generally speaking, at what our groups will look like. As a reminder, our group play will only be the first 4 games on Friday night. So you'll play it through the initials, Saturday will be all of through the qualifiers, and then Sunday will be all of playoffs. So just 4 games tomorrow. Let's take a look to see what Group A has to offer for us. We're getting the Toronto Ultra playing up against the New York Subliners and the Florida Mutineers playing up against the Minnesota Rocker. Starting things, before we get to the big marquee matchup of Florida and Minnesota, let's take a look at Toronto versus New York. The biggest thing for me in this matchup specifically is New York is a team that's coming off of a very, very good weekend. But Toronto also played relatively well when we last saw them go. So as we take a look just at Toronto first and foremost, their search and destroy has been their strong suit all the way through. And you ask why exactly that might be? Simply put, Toronto has been very inconsistent about who's going to show up to the respawns. Cammy consistently plays at the top level, but we don't really know what to expect from everybody else. It really kind of feels like it's map dependent. That said, this is the first matchup versus Toronto and New York, so we don't really have a lot to go back to look on, only to what Toronto last played, where again, they played up against Florida twice and Dallas once during the Dallas home series. All of those games were very, very close. Most notably, they still only went 3-2 in search and destroy, but they went negative in the win-loss when it came to the respawn as a whole. So for me personally, you have to figure out if you're Toronto Ultra, where are you going to play your set hardpoint, where is your favorite domination, and use those as best that you possibly can. Because why? New York, who has been looking very good in their hardpoint specifically, are most struggling in the domination as a whole. They had a couple of close series that they played up against Chicago. They dropped both of the dominations by only a couple of points, but versus a more well-apt team like the Atlanta FaZe, they got absolutely smoked. So that is the biggest weakness right now for the New York Subliners. Beyond that, their search and destroy was just okay. So as we take a look at these two teams specifically, who do you like, who don't you? Personally speaking, because New York has looked a little bit stronger in the respawn as a whole than Toronto, I'm actually leaning towards New York in this one. Really, for me, it just comes down to New York. Just see this get done in 3 or 4 if possible. Win the first 2 respawns. Your life becomes so much easier. For Toronto, on the other hand, you have to take the first search, and you need to split the difference of one of the first 2 hard points. If you can send this to a map 5, you'll be looking a lot better, I think, in the long run against this New York Subliner squad. But I've got New York taking this one 3-1 personally. But then we get to our marquee matchup of the Florida Mutineers going up against the Minnesota Rocker. This is going to be a high impact game. It's the first one that's through, and honestly speaking, in my mind, whoever wins this matchup will likely get to the playoffs in 2. I think both these teams probably still get to the playoffs, but we'll save that conversation until we do our first day recap. But looking at this match specifically, we'll start with Florida first. This is a Florida Mutineers team that has been incredible in the domination specifically. They rank 3rd there currently with a plus 11 point differential. Most of that has been made up in the last couple of weeks. Beyond that, though, their hardpoint has consistently been improving. The big thing about this team, and really this matchup as a whole, is what's going to happen in the search and destroy. Before we get too into it, let's take a look at Minnesota. This is your number 1 rated team in hardpoint right now, plus 20 points on average that they win by, and they're your 6th place domination team, still holding a positive win-loss ratio, but only at a slim margin of differential. The biggest thing is this is your number 8 team in search in Florida and your number 9 team in search in Minnesota. Both teams, again, not having played all that well in the search and destroy in the last couple of weeks. For Florida, they did win their most recent 3 versus Minnesota, Chicago, and Toronto at the Dallas home series, but before that, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 losses in a row in search and destroy. For Minnesota, on the other hand, their streak has gotten worse as of more recently. Losing their last 3, they won 2 versus Seattle, but then had a round 11 loss to Chicago. They got smoked by Dallas. They split the difference with Atlanta, and they were able to beat Seattle. So for this Minnesota team, you got to be better and search faster, I think, if you want to have a chance to take your first championship of the season, because simply put, This team is looking a little bit more worse for the wear when it comes to search and destroy specifically. For me, though, this all comes down to what happens on the domination. I think this game goes 5, and I think whoever wins map 3 probably wins this series. Minnesota has been notoriously incredible and most rehearsed on the domination gunrunner. They have not played Hackney in the last couple of weeks, so maybe there's something to be considered there. But this team's map pool is, I think, a little bit more diverse than Florida's is, just by a touch. Although in domination, it was at one point just St. Petra that Florida was good at. They have now since showcased that they can play a little bit of everything, so they are working on their map pool a touch. And for me, it just comes down to who wins that domination. Personally speaking, I like Minnesota over Florida just by the sheer nature that Minnesota has played more consistently throughout the year than Florida has, who's, again, mostly just been hot as of late. This is really going to be a pick for your poison. Whatever you like, you're not going to be wrong picking the team. It's going to be a close series, I think, in my mind. Going to Group B. Paris Legion going up against the Atlanta FaZe, and Optic Gaming Los Angeles playing up against the London Royal Ravens. This pool going to be a little bit easier to read. Atlanta, Paris, here's the deal. Paris, your search and destroy has been better for you. You have to exist at a high level there, but the problem is you're playing up against the number 2 hardpoint team, the number 1 search team, and the number 1 domination team, of which you rank 6th, 4th, and 7th across the board. So for Paris, what are you hoping for here? You got to win map 1, in my mind. Win map 1, see the series get extended to at least a 4th map. Maybe you have a chance to kind of get the map pool in your favor. But honestly speaking, you take a look at Atlanta, I don't know where you go to play them. Simply put, they seem to be hard vetoing out Ramaza for the search and destroy. Maybe there's something to be said there, but beyond that, they've been incredible just about everywhere, with the exception really of the St. Petro hardpoint where they got 85-250 by the New York Subliners last weekend, and they still lost by a hardpoint to Dallas Empire as well in the same weekend. So if you can take one of the 2 hardpoints away from Atlanta, your chances of winning the series go higher, but simply put, I don't have this one going past at least 4 maps. I've got this being a 3-1 to Atlanta FaZe. Optic Gaming in London and the other park, though, this is going to be interesting because Optic is going to be playing with Chino instead of JCap for the first time, and London has showcased that even though maybe they do want to play with Nasty, Shawnee has been pulling his weight. He's been looking pretty good over the last couple of weekends. So let's start talking about Optic. This is a team that is hard to find positives about right now as they rank 10th in hardpoint, 11th in search, 9th in domination. None of the values are all that great, but I will say their domination has been more consistent than anything else so far for this team in the last handful of weeks, since really LA, where they really kind of started to light up a touch. So if they can continue to be good in domination, you can continue to win map number 3. All you have to do from there, in theory, is just split the difference between the searches and the hardpoints. And do I think that they could do that? Yeah, I think they could, but the problem is you're playing up against a London Royal Ravens team that, yes, they lost 0-3 to Atlanta. Yes, they lost 1-3 to Chicago. Doesn't make a difference. All of those hard points, even though they went 0-3, had a total differential. The highest losing differential they had in hardpoint was a score of 16 points. Search and destroy is where things become a little bit more interesting. It was a round 11 loss to Atlanta. They got smoked on the gunrunner by Chicago. But the good news is they're also still competing in the domination. So for London, your whole goal, take 2 of the 3 respawns, split the difference in the searches. You're good to go here. Personally speaking, I've got London taking this one 3-1. I just don't think Optic's going to have the rehearsal time needed to get Chino acclimated with this team to be super successful. So that's kind of my take for the weekend. I want to know what you guys have to say, though. Jump down to the comments below. Who do you think is going to maybe make the most Cinderella run possible? For me, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I think London has the chance to make it into the playoffs this weekend. That'll be their first time that we've seen them in the playoffs, I think, ever. Don't quote me on that. Couldn't say for sure, but that's what I'm kind of looking at, is London to make the playoffs. And then beyond that, I think you got Atlanta, Florida, and Minnesota looking like your top 3. It just comes down to who has to face Atlanta first and who will meet them likely in the grand finals, as I anticipate Atlanta getting out from the winner's bracket, or the winner's side of their bracket, pretty easily. That's what I got for you guys. We'll be back with the day 1 recap after the events are all done. So don't go too far. Make sure you subscribe on your way out. And until the next one, hope you keep holding it down. So long.